violent urges. Might be just what I need.
Back in 2017, the German studio Deck 13 released The Surge, a science fiction Souls-like title that now received its sequel, The Surge 2. And not to start this review overly negative, but I didn't care much for the first Surge. I thought that game started off poorly, suffering from labyrinthian level design, with shortcuts that felt unrewarding and simply muddled the experience. Combat that never really elevated itself, and the frequent death cause usually being a Zerg rush or drone rush, rather than direct combat failure from the player. Importantly, however, The Surge 2 suffers from none of those issues, improving upon practically every single facet. Even the drones are quite alright. Within the story, The Surge 2 occurs 2 months after the events of the first title. In short, the morally questionable Creo Corporation launched a nanite-loaded missile. In The Surge 2, your custom-crafted main character is then the unfortunate victim of a plane crash, ultimately landing in Jericho City, where these nanites are now running amok. In typical protagonist fashion, you don't have any clue as to what is going on or who to trust, so your main course of action is, of course, grafting your neurosystem to an exosuit and cutting off the limbs and other such extremities from anything that stands in your way. And cutting is very much the name of this game, so let's talk about the meat of the game. The Surge 2 sports a variety of 9 different weapon types, with each offering plenty of new variants to unlock as you go along. In addition to main weapons, you'll also be collecting various gear sets, obtained similarly by ripping them off your enemies, and the so-called implants that offer passive boosts to your combat abilities or function as health and other such defensive restoration abilities. Every time you successfully defeat an enemy, you'll collect scrap, and in Souls-like fashion, this scrap is lost in the event that you die, forcing you to navigate the city back to where you perished to retrieve this valuable currency. Scrap in turn is mainly used to upgrade your power level and either your health, stamina, or battery efficiency to your own liking. Secondly, it's also used to buy or craft and upgrade gear sets, each of which now have both a 3-set bonus and a 6-set bonus, with specific gear allowing you to fill any potential gaps. The end result of all of this is a solid amount of customization and optimization around your chosen playstyle or a given enemy type. This is further enhanced by the aforementioned implants, which can be changed on the fly regardless of where you are at, and as your power level increases, so does the amount of implants you can add to your system. Most of these implants are quite useful, and greatly allow you to adjust the effectiveness of your chosen playstyle. Do you prefer to go entirely aggressive? Do you prefer to focus on blocking and parrying? Or do you simply want to dodge any attacks coming in your direction? Arguably, these implants also allow for a soft difficulty adjustment through the means of UI indicators, namely health and balance bars above enemies, or through directional parry indicators, though I found this to ultimately be a bit of an ugly fit. As these UI indicators don't reward you with any actual combat power, unlike all the other implants, they feel a bit bad to use from a pure optimization standpoint, but at the same time, there are scenarios where not using these quality of life upgrades simply feels too clunky. This is mended a little by the fact that implants start to cost a lot of power, meaning these quote-unquote cheap UI implants are usually usable to some degree, as you often simply can't fill every implant slot, but this doesn't work out if you lean on a low power gear build, because in this case you'll have plenty of power to spare for implants. For instance, I mainly played my first run as a directional parry focused character, and although I never really wanted to use the directional parry UI indicator, as it simply didn't give me any stats, not using it felt very awkward in scenarios where I'd be fighting more than one enemy. In theory, I could have gone in and removed this every time a boss fight came up for something more substantial, but this felt like a small change, simply not worth the continuous hassle. In The Surge 2, you are also joined by a drone companion, and this little fellow is a little hit and miss. Customizable through unlockable weapons ranging from snipers to lightning beams and stun guns, it sometimes feels as though they tried looking for a reason to give it purpose by introducing specific boss elements that benefit from drone use, but never quite organically hit the mark. Although by no means a total loss, the drone can on occasion be quite useful, and especially the stun ability is extremely efficient when outgunned, allowing for some good combo potential. But it can sometimes feel a tad too separate from the base combat. That being said, proper use and a drone-oriented build does offer a functional, different playstyle. Wrapping up the gear system, the 9 different weapon types all feel nicely distinct and offer once more a good level of customization to your chosen playstyle. These 9 weapon types range from extremely fast weapons, such as the twin-rigged or brawler-style weaponry, to extremely slow weapons and a variety of options in between. Additionally, you can also swap weapons mid-combat with the press of a button through the favorite weapon system. Each of these weapon styles have their own movesets, and interestingly, this also gets adjusted through the iconic body targeting system. If it wasn't apparent yet, in the Surge 2 you'll focus a lot on where you'll be hitting your enemies with the ultimate goal of cutting that part off, be it to simply do more damage, to cripple them, or more likely to obtain the items they're holding. But whether you're targeting someone's head or their legs often adjusts how your vertical and horizontal attacks will pan out. With a one-handed sword, for instance, a vertical pommel to the head is quite different from a vertical ground scrape that can result in an aerial juggle. More to the point, properly using vertical or horizontal attacks can significantly increase your damage output by accurately hitting the body parts you're targeting. These horizontal and vertical attacks are your bread and butter, and are inherently not slower than one another, but can also be charged up for heavier strikes, namely against armored or shielded enemies. And this is where the combat in the Surge 2 can get quite, surgical.
I'm a useless metallic vegetable.
Although some of the weapon types promote a very fast attack pattern, taking a spam attack approach is generally the quickest way to losing a fight, as plenty of systems reward proper stamina management. For starters, each of the weapon types have their own perfect timing windows in which the stamina cost of an attack gets drastically reduced. If, over time, you properly learn these patterns, you'll get a lot more mileage out of your very limited stamina pool. Stamina is further used for dodging attacks, which can get quite costly but is the easiest, albeit often least rewarding, defensive action. Some attacks can actually be jumped over or ducked under, rewarding your precision with a heavy counterattack. Your second defensive option is to instead block an attack, which costs a large amount of stamina, and holding block down prevents stamina regeneration, but can potentially be very rewarding due to the directional block system granting you the option of parrying nearly every attack in the game, whether they're bosses or not. This is by no means easy to pull off, especially as a lot of enemies have elaborate attack animations that often include fake-outs, but the rewards for this is much greater, as plenty of implants and gear sets offer buffs when correctly parried, and parrying inherently starts to stagger enemies and bosses, opening them up to heavy counterattacks. In short, if you're willing to take the risk and learn the patterns, you'll find this system to greatly increase the damage output you can do. Deliberate attacks aside, the Surge 2's combat is never slow, as it does inherently benefit from aggressive action due to the battery system, which in function works as both the electrical and the physical assault meaning of the word. In essence, every attack you perform grants you a certain amount of battery, which when filled can be used to perform executions or to use injectable implants, most notably healing. The end result is that in theory healing is infinite, but it requires you to find the right moments to be aggressive and deal a lot of damage to charge your battery. Adding this all together and you end up with an extremely robust and relatively unique combat system. It both rewards a deliberate approach and yet promotes quick actions. Even though you want to be on the aggressive, it never gets spammy. Dodging and parrying are both extremely useful, with the latter being riskier but possibly more rewarding, and either way both have to be timed correctly rather than mindlessly executed. If you pull all of this off, you'll be rewarded in plenty of scrap to specialize in the elements you like best. In fact, if you like a little extra risk, the Surge 2 rewards running around with large amounts of scrap with even more scrap. And running around is something you'll do quite frequently. Unfortunately, from an aesthetic and narrative standpoint, this is where the Surge 2 gets less interesting, as the story ultimately doesn't really go anywhere. It almost starts to lean into the realm of fantasy, which is amusing, but the antagonists feel forced and ham-fisted. They're not overbearing to the point of being obtrusive, but the narrative isn't much to write home about, as it simply feels very by the numbers. It could have done more, especially considering the transhumanism content they could have worked with, but they ultimately keep it very basic and action-oriented, where it exists entirely just to push you from one point to another. Although there is a clear injection of personality compared to the previous, the setting does feel limited. The cult-infested and forested zones feel like a breath of fresh air, irradiated as it may be, but a large amount of time will simply be spent in what is basically just a dilapidated city, or zones with a blue hue that is simply too prominent, which is meant to indicate heavier nanite presence. From a visual standpoint, it never really gets quite as outlandish as you'd hope to see considering the themes, and a lot of the core zones in Jericho City do lack aesthetic individuality. That said, luckily this basic push from A to B is functionally without issue, and in fact very pleasant to navigate. Although it may visually be a tad dull, Jericho City has excellent level design, as the map essentially peels back on itself with a ton of helpful and rewarding shortcuts scattered throughout that are obvious once unlocked. With the exception of the very annoying power plant level, though granted that's mainly due to the overuse of the electrical debuff, Zones usually have enough space to dodge and kite around in, meaning you don't get bogged up by swarms of zombies, nano-zombies in this case, and Jericho City becomes noticeably faster to navigate the more you unlock. Not to mention the addition of the multiplayer systems such as graffiti and banners can definitely help to create amusing moments. In the end, The Surge 2 is a great title, even for people such as myself that didn't like the first game. It's far from flawless, especially since the aesthetic design is far more dull than I'd like to see it be, but the excellent combat carries it from start to finish. I wish there were more bosses. With the exception of one boss where the camera didn't work out at all, most of them are quite fun and play well into the core combat system and feel rewarding to beat, but a few too many of them are simply regular human-type bosses that, although mechanically are still fun to fight, really do lack an element of spectacle. And that, I suppose, sums up The Surge 2 quite well. Beyond the lovely decapitations, it lacks spectacle in a lot of areas. That said, The Surge 2 is mechanically very rewarding and fun to play, and I would definitely recommend picking it up. Thank you for watching, my name has been Haas, and I'll see you in the next video or livestream.